of Sweden from 2006 to 2014. Mr. Reinfeldt has been active in Swedish and international politics for over 25 years. As leader of the Moderaterna, or Moderate Party, he formed a four-party alliance that won 2 successive elections. Today, he is actively giving lectures on global geopolitics, leadership, economics, and European and Nordic politics. This is in addition to his role as president of the Swedish Football Association and chair of Visita, the Swedish organization representing branches and employers in the hospitality sector. In this first keynote of ISWC 2025, titled Leadership in an Aged Nation, Bold Reforms for a Future-Ready Society, Mr. Reinfeldt will explore how nations must adapt their traditional systems of social protection, healthcare, and employment in facing an increasingly aging nation while upholding economic sustainability and ensuring fairness and inclusivity. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to His Excellency, Mr. Fredrik Reinfeldt.
Thank you very much and good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings from Sweden, very far distant from Malaysia. I can tell you I've flown quite many hours to come here, but it's great to be here. It's a great honor for me. Sweden is a 10.5 million inhabitant country in the north of Europe. To come close to Malaysian inhabitant figures, we need to form all the Nordic countries together. Then we move in Norway, Finland, Denmark, Iceland, and then we reach nearly 30 million. So that's to compare with Malaysia. But there are similarities. Sweden, like Malaysia, is a constitutional monarchy, and we are multi-ethnic, multicultural, like your country, and we used to be poor. We used to be very poor. If you go back a couple of generations, we had very big troubles with the illiteracy, with actually people having the opportunity to put food on the table. We had a large portion of our society who were actually not included with the rest of us. And this is a very important starting point, which is similar for many countries, and they sometimes tend to forget that they have been poor and that we need to understand how we became richer and created a more inclusive society before we answer to the question how we relate to the challenges of today. So how did Sweden and some of these European countries become richer? Well, first of all, we have not been into any war for more than 200 years. And I think this is a very firm point to make at this time in age, that warfare is the destruction of everything that is good. So to be able to actually form a society where you're not at war with anyone and definitely not with your neighbors, it's a very important experience. Sweden, like most others, have a long history of being at war with our neighbors, with Denmark, with Russia, with the neighboring countries we have around us. But we found ways to live together, coming closer, and not looking at inclusiveness as only one thing that is inside our country, but also actually cross borders to neighbors. When I speak to teenagers in my home country today and mention that 200 years ago we were actually at war with our neighbors, they actually laugh because it's a ridiculous thought. They can't even imagine that that has been part of our history. I understand that in many parts of the world this is not the experience. I've just wanted to show that as an example on what is a basis for getting better conditions. Then, of course, like Malaysia, we have had entrepreneurs, engineers that have thought about how to reshape industry, coming up with new fantastic ideas, and we had the breathing ground for starting a lot of companies, some of them 150 years ago, but also still ongoing in our society. That is, of course, how you create jobs, how you create new companies. And this also relates to the fact that we have been a trading nation. I think you very often forget this, that to be really big, or actually being able to create a greater economy, you need to interact with others. It's clear for everyone, but especially if you're a small or medium-sized country. If you're an entrepreneur in Sweden, you very soon will say that the home market in Sweden is too small. You need to go cross-border and find the demand out there around the world and therefore become export-oriented. I mention this because the tone of the world today is to look inward, to be ready to start with protectionism and go nation first. And to my knowledge, that's a mistake. That's a way to get poorer, not richer, because it's actually to trade with others that has created the wealth that we see in Sweden and many other countries. It's companies of size that actually get to be big enough to pay taxes, to actually employ a lot of people. So that was the important breeding ground. But then, of course, capitalism and market economy can create richness. They can create wealth, but the risk we see in the world is that it tends to be too concentrated to a few families, a percentage point of the population, and not to be a source of inclusiveness for everyone. To do that, you need a political project. You need a kind of handshake in your country where you form together the wealth created by entrepreneurs and trade with an idea to include your population. That social contract has been in place in Sweden for 50, 60, 70 years, and it's taken for granted by many in my home country. And that is, of course, a risk, that you think that these systems are there forever, and they are definitely challenged. But just a few words, what is that social contract? Well, it's, of course, tax-paid welfare in the sense that we have free education. First 9 years, secondary school for 3 years, we have free admittance to universities without any fees, and we give actual support to students so that they can attend university and get support at the same time. Otherwise, it tends to be universities for children from rich homes. So, and in doing so, you miss out a lot of the potential of a society. It's extremely important that it's actually based more on merits, and that sons and daughters of every family have the opportunity to come into the university system. That's a starting point. Then, of course, healthcare, that was mentioned by the initial speaker. Healthcare, which is also tax-paid and also given to everyone without, well, low fees, but not high fees. First, the primary healthcare sector, where you can have your own doctor, and then a secondary specialist level with hospitals to support the population. This is, of course, extremely important for the well-being of people and families, that they understand that we have a high-quality healthcare system to support them. We have also decoupled, which is often the tendencies in countries that have been rich for a while, that you tend to decouple families, in the sense that we also have elderly care for older people at a very late age, where they can be in service-related apartments, where they can live with support and not live with their family or their daughters or their sons later up in the age. Why is that important? Because it tends to be a kind of lock-in of women taking support for older people and therefore not being able to be part of the labor market. So elder care has also been extremely important. Very often, when we relate to this, there are also discussions about the social insurances that we have, which are also tax-paid or state-controlled. So you could actually get support for parental leave, for sick leave, even for unemployment schemes, so that you know that even if you lose your job or if you get a child, you have a support to leave the labor market for a while and then come back. And the big discussion has, of course, also, as mentioned, been the pension system. The pension system defined with a level of, and that discussion took place actually, what should be the age where we define a pension level. It was defined in Sweden at the age of 67. That decision was taken in 1913. 1913, that's 112 years ago, in what they thought then was probably the life expectancy they thought would be the same forever. So a decision made for more than 100 years is still a ground foundation of how our society works. It was brought down from 67 to 65, but it's still probably the year in the mindset of people in Sweden still, that when you're 65, you stop working. And then you take for granted that after that you have a pension system that will support you for the rest of your life. This is our social contract. This is, of course, sometimes in many of these European countries and other parts of the world, very much discussed when it comes to fine-tuning. But basically, we are very, very large in agreement that this should be the social foundation open for everyone. So how do we then finance this? Well, that relates to growth. A growth is something that we hope to see all over the world, and growth tends to be better in more developing parts of the world, but even the developed economies have still a growing economy. There are two factors to understand growth that are important. First, which is the one which is often most discussed, is productivity. How to be more efficient, effective in your economy. But the other factor is the amount of working hours in your economy. And then I don't mean individually numbers for working hours, I mean aggregated for the whole of the population. If you take productivity times the number of worked hours in your economy as a whole, then you get your growth. So you need to analyze the two main factors, how to create productivity and how to keep up the working hours to get the growth into your economy. It's very often said that countries like Sweden, who has been highly developed now for quite many years, tend to be high taxation economies. But the truth is that we have now had this development for a long time with very good growth figures, that we actually are able to finance this social welfare contract at the same time as the level of taxation has come down. It used to be around 50% of GDP that was taken into taxes in Sweden. Nowadays it's down to nearly 40. So 40% of GDP, and that's the lowest level of taxation in Sweden for 50 years. How is that possible? Well, that's the growth of the economy. If the economy grows, then you can, with lower tax tariffs, actually get the same amount or even more. And I mentioned this because that's been a wrong conception that the only way to increase this welfare or this social contract is to raise taxes. It might be for a start, but our experience is that if you have the right mechanisms to make the economy grow, then you can also lower, or you need to lower, at least some part of the taxation. So then, exactly as the theme of this conference, this is where we are now. And there is a lot of things going around the world. As mentioned when I was introduced, I speak a lot of geopolitics, I speak about climate change, sustainability, but I'm now going to concentrate to the three main agents that is reforming, putting pressure on this productivity times working hours, creating growth. Three major agents of our time. And the first of them are, of course, technological transformation of our economy, of our markets, and of our lifestyle. This is most often described only as something positive, at least in my part of the world. Oh, it's so fantastic what you can do with computer science, what you can do with future robots, what we believe artificial intelligence will do with our societies. And of course, in a sense, it creates more productivity. Through using computer science, artificial intelligence, you actually increase the productivity of the economy, and nothing else change, that might end up in higher growth and a more modern society. But do we know this? Is that a fact that it's only creating productivity with no other changes? I have experts in my country saying that we now believe that the digitalization of our society will reshape our labor market to the point where probably half of the jobs we have in Sweden, that's 5 million, around 5 million, so probably 2.5 million of those jobs will disappear or be totally transformed through this technological transformation. Then those who are most optimistic about technological transformation says, well, that might not be a problem because there will be new jobs created. And then my question will be, will these new jobs go to the people who lost the old jobs? And very often the answer is no, because the technological transformation requires new skills, new educational basis, and it tends to push out older parts of the labor force. Therefore, it's not just to welcome technology. Transformation. I'm not saying that we should be against it or try to stop it, because I don't think that's possible. But if you have an inclusive view of society, then you must ask yourself, what will be the effects on the total amount of working hours? What happens with the labor force if only technological transformation is changing our society? The second one, which is also in the framework of this conference, is of course the increased life expectancy. And this is much bigger impact in society than we understand. And Sweden has probably come further and further than we now see in Malaysia, but you are coming closely behind in the same direction. I mean, let's be honest, it's good news. We can live longer lives than our grandparents. As mentioned, the move from the 50s in Malaysia up to now mid-70 as life expectancy. In my country, we have jumped 10 more years, especially for women, now cruising against 90 as the life expectancy on average. On average. The men are not at the same level, the women are living longer lives, but all the same. This will mean that we will be flooded by people that are 100 years old or older. You know, we had a tradition in our country that our king, who is only ceremonial, he writes a letter to everyone who has reached their 100 years birthday. And the king used to do that in handwriting because it was so nice and there were so few of them. I think he has to rethink that. That's basically the only thing the king will do. That's write these letters to all these 100-year-old people everywhere. There are such big numbers, and there's this is only the beginning. And exactly as portioned here, it's not only a shift to live to 100, it's also the fact that the big boom we have when we look at our population are not above 65, as I mentioned, the year to stop working. No, the big boom is above 80. And it's the only booming, really, sector of our population. This might not be a problem, but of course, on the balance, if the numbers are increasing of those who think for granted that they do not need to work and that they are funded by a very nice and generous pension system at the same time as the middle-aged shrink, then you have a problem. The third, and that pushes on to this that I now mentioned, that we see in Sweden and all over the developed world, alongside longer life expectancies, we also see very low birth rates. And for a long time, there was a discussion, are there any examples in the developed world where they do not see the decrease of birth rates? Yes, there are those countries. I've been to South Korea, which is down to 0.79, and of course, lowest in the world. I know this discussion is in China. It also now comes to many countries in Asia. Japan have this discussion. We also have it in Europe. My answer is that on the balance, you might be able to push it 0.1 or 0.2 For a long time, we thought in Sweden that we would be on a higher level on birth rates, linked to the fact that we have generous parental leaves, that we have better systems for making life balance for men and women, being able to balance the fact that they are mother and fathers and working at the same time. But the truth is that we also see diminishing birth rates now going below 1.5. And as you understand, as long as you go beneath 2.1 children born per woman during their lifetime, then you have a shrinking population. So we have now shrinking populations all over the developed world, and the only explosion increase in population you see more or less concentrated to Africa. That in itself is a challenge for mankind and for the world, giving sustainability, climate change, and everything that we discussed. But for my home country, the question then becomes, so very low birth rates, an explosion of people above the age of 80. What is the balance in this new society? And there is no reference to this. We have never been there before. There are very few examples around the world on what you actually can do to meet this. I think it's very important to say, and I looked into a lot of the programs around the world, partly in Europe and other parts, where governments are trying to get the levels of birth rates to go higher. There are state-funded advertisements on telling young people that they should get more children. We have economic handouts in many countries, some of them very generous. Lots of political leaders are talking about getting more children, and no one seems really to listen. There are some fundamentals in society that are shifting away from thinking this is only economy, this is only, shaping up and get a child. It sounds as if I'm making a joke about this, but some of these campaigns have been very criticized, especially by women, as if the only thing you need to tell me as an older man is that now you need to become a mother, and then say, yeah, right. Where have you been? It doesn't work. That's my message. Be very careful in trying to tell young people what to do. Rather try to understand the fundamentals in society, that for a lot of young girls and boys, to put a child to life is a big decision in this very, very strange world that we are living in, with the geopolitical situation, with climate change, and a lot of people are very much aware of this, and therefore they put in question how they want to live their lives, also regarding giving childbirth. But it's not only that, it's also the fact that women, and this is very true for Sweden, want to secure that they, after education, actually can get a good job, get into the labor market. Very many times they want to become a mother, but later on. And therefore, we used to have a tendency that first-time mothers were around 20, even 25. It has gone up to 30. In the bigger cities, it's nearly 40. And of course, if you wait until the age of 35, 40 before you get your first child, it might not be a second. So, therefore, it's very much a discussion that if you don't start early, you will not get more children. But the problem, to be very honest, is it's not a good policy to try to get very young women to get children. We had teenage births in many parts of the world, which creates a lot of problems. So don't support the idea that it's very smart to get teenage girls to get pregnant. It's not. I think we need to reflect more that this is a new way of living and adapt to that. Don't point fingers to young people. Adapt to the fact that we will have lower birth rates. And maybe that's good for the world as such, that we don't just keep on growing the world population. I know that there were reflections that we were becoming 11 billions or something. Now we refer to figures that it might be 9 billion or something like that, because in many parts of the world, the actual population rate is decreasing. Just a few words on the fact that it's not decreasing in my home country, although we have this low birth rate. How come? Well, that relates to immigration. And this is politically the most tense matter in many parts of the world, also including Europe. There is a balancing factor if you're worried about decreasing populations. And it's not to try to fix the birth rates, it's actually to make legal immigration flows into your country. And you should know that Sweden, as I started by saying, is a multi-ethnic, multicultural country. More than 20% of our population is born outside of Sweden, but has become Swedish citizens, 1/5. That's actually the full range of the population growth that we have, which creates growth, which creates a vibrant economy, but all the same, political forces throughout the world point at immigrants as only a social problem that we need to keep out, keep away, or even send home. This seems very strange as a policy upon low birth rates, decreasing populations, to close the door to immigrants or ask them to leave. Even though I say this, this is ongoing in many parts of the world. It is as if these politicians who are doing this don't understand in which direction they are pointing. They are actually pushing on the decreasing of the population, pushing them further into the balance problem that we now lie ahead. This is, of course, sometimes referred to tensions that are created with immigration, absolutely. We have seen this in Sweden as well. But it has taken over the picture, giving a wrong sense linked to the fact, as I mentioned, that every 5th citizen in Sweden is born outside of Sweden and have actually come with a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience to make Sweden greater, richer, by coming to us. I will now mention 3 reforms which I myself in government have done to try to balance the things that are now happening, the transformation of our society. And the first and probably most important is the knowledge to incentivize work. In saying incentivize work, this is sometimes misinterpreted as if I'm saying those who work the most hours should top on with a couple of more hours. That's not what I'm saying. That's often very stupid. No, what I'm saying is that it's the again, productivity versus the aggregated amount of worked hours in society. So it's not just the most skilled, the few, that should be working more hours. No, it's more an understanding that it should go much broader. By incentivizing work, you actually make an analysis of your full population, and you look especially at 4 groups and see how much do they actually work and how can you incentivize them to work more. This is the case of Sweden. There are differences between countries, but also for very many countries the challenges are the same. The first question you must ask yourself, at what age do young people come into the labor market? And do they really make their exams in the right time, and do they really meet a labor market where the threshold are low enough to get them into the labor market? They have no other experience than that they are young and probably better educated than older parts of the labor force, but they must be let in. You must analyze how the thresholds into the labor market work and how this functions for young people. There is a tendency in very developed countries where we find a lot of these young people that we cannot really answer to the question what they are doing. They are not in education, they are not working. We don't know what they are doing. They are probably at least some of the boys sitting at home playing video games. And that's not how you get incentives for work to do the job, so to speak. We have incentivized them partly by making specific breaks, tax breaks, or lowered the social costs for employing young people, just to show our efforts. And we have told the state authorities that work with the labor market to pinpoint directly that young people either go to an education or actually come into the labor market. That's the first group. The second group, and that goes alongside with the booming of the 80-plus people, you must ask yourself, you can incentivize people to stay longer in the workforce at older ages. This is the, of course, most important answer to the fact that we are living longer lives. A lot of these people becoming 70, 75, 80 still have the ability to work. They are actually very functional. We look at our 70-year-olds today in our society, and when it comes to physical and psychological profiling, they are like the 50-year-olds were in 1970s. So when it comes to capacity, 70-year-old in my country is like 50-year-old used to be. They are totally capable of still to be working. It's only about incentivizing. And this is the big discussion. Should you push them to work even if they don't want to, by raising the level of the pension age for everyone? This is done now in many developed countries. It's moved up to 68, 69 years of age, and there is a lot of protests against this, and we have political forces saying no, it should be lower. People don't want to work, they want to have more freedom, more spare time. So I say start by incentivizing. Make specific breaks directed towards the older part of the labor force, and you will see that you get front runners. And they will be big numbers when it starts moving, because you need to send the signal to your society to accept older people still in their jobs. If you have a 70-year-old in your workforce, it's easier to say yes to the second. And then they bring along a third. And then you have changed perception that you actually can work at an older age. And when we did this, we directed specific tax breaks to those who kept on working after 65. We saw a booming effect. So nearly 20% of the population above the age of 65 to 70 are now continuously working, still in the labor force, increasing the number of working hours. Extremely important to do this. I actually said many years ago that we should pinpoint in our heads that in the future we should be ready to work until the age of 75. People thought I was crazy, and this was the worst thing they have ever heard. But I told them, I'm not saying that you should stay at the same job and do exactly what you did when you were 25. That would be extremely stupid. Do something else. Do something which is in line with your capacity today. But do something, because just to leave very early, we still have those people who think, oh, I want to leave the labor market at the age of 60. I want to have free time, and you know, I have a lot of things to do. And then I ask them, okay, so if you live to be 100, then you have 40 years to do this. Have you prepared yourself for this 40 years of not working? And they have no clue, because no one used to live to be 100. So to live for 40 years without working, it gets kind of boring after a time. So I think a lot of these life decisions are based on what used to be, not looking into capacity of people as they look today. Linked to that, and that's the second thing, that's the retraining schemes that we have grown out in Sweden since the mid-1970s. Our social partners, when they make the collective bargaining contract we have in our labor market, put away part of the money spent not on salaries, but giving to retraining schemes, which actually go in to help people that are laid off or put under pressure in the age of 45, not wanted in the labor market, retraining them, reskilling them, getting them to, in their mindset, see that they have a second or a third career. If I'm true in what I said about the technological transformation, it's very stupid to think that you at the age of 20 can choose a line of work that will last you until the age of 70. The job will not exist anymore. It's a very stupid idea. You need to be more flexible, more open to move yourself around the labor market. This is tough for many people.